To 100% complete Enchanted Portals, I will have to learn to become the greatest wizard there ever was, eliminate every foe that decides to challenge my magical prowess, blow past several obstacle courses that require S-tier platforming skills, become the greatest Quidditch player in the history of the sport, and engage in epic combat against a witch stuck in a pot, a blondie with a frog complex, a narcissistic chicken, and much more. I'm also gonna have to do all this while playing the game on the most difficult mode, which will require me to beat the game without dying a single time in order to obtain an achievement so rare it has yet to be attained by anyone. The game begins with these two kid apprentices of a wizard who discover a magical book that opens a magical portal that takes them to a magical world, I guess. But the place didn't really ooze any magical qualities, as it seemed like we were just dropped off a forest that clearly screamed normal. And by we, I mean just this bloke right here. God knows what happened to the girl. But that was the least of my problems, as I was already met with a cumbersome situation where I had to press every button on my keyboard to try and figure out the controls, since the tutorial section had but an image to relay any sort of information. Baffled by the ridiculousness of the current state of affairs, I decided to open the options menu, which I then found the controls by doing so. I don't know why I had to go out of my way to search for them myself, but oh well. Some of the things I could do were jumping twice, dashing forward, creating a force field, firing projectile-like spells, lock my aim in place, melee attack using this sad excuse of a wand, and activating a power-up by filling up this meter here to buff up all my spells to deal more damage. I also changed the keybinds to that of what I'm used to instead of the original mumbo jumbo that made me play the game like this. Not so keyboard friendly if you ask me. Regardless of the rough beginning, I rolled with it anyway and encountered my first enemy, which was a bat that enlarged itself that oddly also made him go from 1080p to 240. The saying of being blind as a bat reigned true for this game, as the flying rodent had a difficult time landing his stoner-like attacks on me. I too had a hard time eliminating the nerd, since for some weird reason it had an invisible barrier that made him immune to anything I threw at him. But then I changed up my shot and that apparently did the trick. Seems like some of the mobs in the game are color-coded, where they can only be eliminated using the magic that matches the corresponding hue. Quite creative, but also very annoying. I went further into the forest, encountering yet another enemy, but this time it was a ghastly doggo that flew in both directions. I used to be a firm believer of the saying, the more the merrier, but this right here made me start to think otherwise. Realizing that I couldn't outrun my adoring fans, I paused to get rid of every last one of them before proceeding onward. Nearly died doing so, but then again I would have died anyway. After wiping out an entire generation of fleeter mice, I eventually made it to the end of the forest, which stood before me a haunted hotel that clearly ran out of business, cause let's face it, it's in the middle of the freaking forest. Upon entering, I expected a warm welcome and maybe a tall glass of water for our wizard friend here, who's been sticking his tongue out for the last 10 minutes, but instead I was met with the sneaky knight that smacked me with his polearm, a waiter who served me a ghost with an uncontrollable urge to bite, mates with an obsessive cleaning disorder, and a soon-to-be laid-off baggage porter for hurling all the guest luggage at me. The biggest issue I ran into while going through this level was when I had multiple waiters show up on top of a maid to swish across me out of nowhere, and because of that, it led to my very first death. But that's fine, since I'm probably gonna spawn in the nearest checkpoint in the game. There was no checkpoint in the game. I'm having second thoughts about this challenge. It is what I thought for a good millisecond or two, but I've been through a lot worse in the past, so I threw away that beta mindset and put on my big boy pants as I marched on forward to overcome this impossibly hard feat. This is so not worth it. All that to say, I was still determined to continue on because I had nothing better to do with my life, and what doesn't kill me will make me stronger, right? I mean that figuratively, I'm gonna die a lot. Moving on from that comes what I believe to be the grindiest part of the game, which was the second floor of the hotel, where I had to go through a corridor, but this time with a bunch of Spider-Man wannabes that shot webs at me. And yes, the mates were still going at it with their OCD. You'd think that they would figure out by now that all that cleaning won't do them any good since they're using a phantom broom, but who am I to judge? As for me, I was getting sick of the slow pace of all the levels, so I decided to blow past this one with speed and nimbleness. But one thing I noticed when I tried that, at the expense of dying of course, was that for every spider that I passed spawned a maid, which had me at times deal with a stampede load of them at once. So yes, I had to kill every last one of the little critters one at a time, which felt like I was waiting in line for the next PlayStation, except when I tried to cut the line, I got mobbed. The levels were already incredibly drawn out to the point where it put me to sleep half the time, but nevertheless, with a bit of patience, well, a buttload of patience actually, I made it to the end of this humdrum of a level and managed to take on the very first boss. The boss was a witch that must have concealed itself from its true form, which was probably a wrinkled old cat lady, because my goodness, she wasn't about to run out of them cats anytime soon. I picked a green spell to shoot at her instead of the other one-liners, since it allowed me to cozy up in this one spot to unfairly deal damage to the infinite feline summoner, in which I just had to look out for the kitty cat. The entire thing had me question the whole logic of the insane mode, but at the same time, I wasn't complaining. Then I started complaining, as the second phase was nothing like the first one, where now I had to dodge a snake that slithered out of the witch's pot, a red gas bubble that blew up in my face, and also a green gas bubble that when I got near it would spew a barf-like substance that I did not want to at all indulge in. On top of that, I don't think I've mentioned this in the beginning, but the controls were actually very unresponsive and floaty compared to Cuphead, which is the game that inspired this game, where everything feels buttery smooth and just overall very clean right down to the pixel. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but let's just say sometimes I felt like I was possessed. Seeing that I was very low on health, I decided to manually quit out of the fight and restart, knowing that I was gonna die anyway. And just when I thought I was gonna start all the way back from the beginning, something amusing happened. Oh wow, I found a glitch. A glitch found indeed, as with it, I now had the power to restart a level anytime I wanted, granting me access to the greatest power in the history of video games, which was immortality. Or so I thought, but it turns out I was always one hit away from dying. But it seemed like this was due to the fact that I had fully died, which when I restarted the level, instead of gaining all my health back, I would start in the red. And this aroused my curiosity where it led me to restart the game altogether. Got hit multiple times where my health was in the reds. Then I restarted the level, which apparently put me all the way back to full health. And this is huge because a while ago when I died in the hotel level, I went all the way back to the beginning. But with this glitch, not only do I get my health back, but I could potentially play a level until I beat it without losing any health, which also theoretically meant that I could reach the final boss with all my health intact so long as I didn't die. Well, turns out it wasn't gonna be that simple, as I found out that if I moved on to the next level after losing some health, using it didn't get me back in the greens, but rather it brought me back to the color I started with, which meant that I was gonna have to make some executive decisions in regards to how much health I'm willing to sacrifice when I get to the impossibly hard level, but more on that later. After experimenting with the glitch a few more times, I came to the conclusion that in order to actually be able to 100% this game, I was gonna have to preserve as much, if not all my health, until I was comfortable enough to lose some of them in the latter half of the game, which I must say had me seriously question myself as to whether this was even worth it. Even a 5-year-old with an IQ of 1 would know it isn't, but then again, I am a YouTuber. On that note, subscribe because I want to reach 100k by the end of this year. If not, I'm gonna delete my chat. Anyways, now that I had a brilliantly curated plan, all I had to do now was to execute it. And since I've already gone through the first 3 levels like a bazillion times, completing them hitless was quite easy. All I had to do was take my sweet time taking down every last one of the mobs before proceeding forward and not get cocky by thinking I was a gaming god and make dumb mistakes. I made dumb mistakes, but I had the power to turn back time, so does it really matter? It so mattered because restarting a level meant that I got sent all the way back to the beginning of the level, which was not fun since again they are extremely drawn out. Like, what's the point of that cat holding a 50% completed sign if it won't let me spawn back to it, huh? As you can see, I was just a tad bit salty about the whole structure of the game, but I eventually make it to the witch without losing a single health. But I wondered if I could do the same with her despite having lost to her several times prior to the awakening of my time traveling ability. Her second phase was the trickiest part of the 3 as I didn't quite have an answer to her snake and gas bubble combo. Not to mention the dreadfully unrefined controls that further handicapped me during the whole thing. But with every attempt against her, I gradually gained a bit more understanding as to how to time around her attacks, which was to use the barrier whenever I was met with an unfavorable situation. Some of these situations were one where I was absolutely gonna get hit, and since there was a fairly long cooldown for the barrier ability, I had to carefully discern the best times to use it. This here was my 26th attempt, and boy did it pay off as I finally got through the second phase without getting hit. As for the third phase, all I had to do was double jump over the witch, switch my spell to the fireball thingy to deal better damage, and use my barrier whenever she closed in on me. And without a kill animation in sight, I managed to beat the witch without losing a single health. The poor cat lady ends up imploding into a cataclysmic spewage of acid, dissolving into a green goo, and turning our wizard friend and the girl, who somehow appears out of nowhere, back to normal. But then a ray of light beamed down on them where they got sucked into a flying saucer along with the magical book, and off they went. With the completion of the first world, I unlocked the achievements for beating the witch and another one for doing so on insane mode, which granted me access to the next world. In the first level of World 2, I came across my very first daunting obstacle where I was met with an impenetrable lasered wall. I shot fireballs at it, but much to my disappointment, it didn't even dent it. But then I used my wimpy wand, and sure enough, it got obliterated. What? After losing the remainder of my logic from that, I continued on and encountered these plasma energy blasts that started coming my direction. I figured it was a cheeky attack from an enemy afar, so I frantically waved around my wand, firing my spell to try and kill it without having to confront it. Some might call this cowardice, but to me, it was a one-way ticket to glorious victory, so agree to disagree. Funny enough though, after going at it for a good 10 minutes, the attacks didn't stop. So I had no choice but to embrace my courageous side by charging forward, knowing full well that I was gonna have to face the mysterious unknown entity that lay beyond the screen. I fell to my death before I could do that. My second attempt went a little better since this time I was introduced to a different variance of the obstacle where I had to simply avoid getting hit by the laser shot by the surveillance cameras, which made me feel like the greatest spy known to mankind. Oh my gosh, I suck. I also came across this weirdo who tried to smack me with his tentacles, in which I used my barrier to deny him of the pleasure of doing so. Hey, keep your hands to yourself. There was also this caterpillar thingo that occasionally dropped by that made the level that much more insufferable. Like, I'm talking, if it wasn't for this robo caterpie, I would have finished this level on my first attempt kind of insufferable, because man, this guy made sure I had my guard up all the time, sometimes even going through it. As you can tell, there was a lot to keep track of, and I was honestly unsure if I could make it to the end without sacrificing a life or two. I kept at it hoping that I could get lucky, and surely enough, on my 37th attempt, the RNG gods blessed me where I didn't have to go through the obstacle with the moving platforms, turning this incredibly difficult level into a walk in the park. Once I arrived at the end, I was met with a supercomputer that sent me and my female wizard friend into the digital realm, where I'm immediately attacked by the popos for just existing. Hey, just like in real life. Anyways, I got rid of the one in the front, realizing that I could outrun the guy in the back. But the guy in the back must have realized he couldn't catch up to me with the many donuts he consumed all those years, so he immediately called for backup. However, I wasn't too fazed by it since I could just keep getting rid of the guy in the front and dodging the little coronas that tried to obstruct my advances. As I kept moving forward, I was sure that if the structure of the level was going to continue as is, I was well on my way to beating it without losing any health at all. But then the unthinkable happened. No freaking way. Are you kidding me? This is just straight up sadistic. As you can see, the little coronas decided to inject themselves with steroids, transforming them into an indestructible weapon of mass destruction. And I say indestructible because they're literally immune to taking damage whatsoever. And so what was a breeze of a level at first turned into the most rigorously unforgiving nightmare of a level I could have ever imagined. Like, these things came at me in 3 separate lines, and since they came at a relatively fast pace, using my barrier to block them was not feasible at all. The method I found to be the most effective in getting around them was just to rely on my reaction speed and jump over them the best I could while dealing with all this. Another thing that made all this even crazier was that they appeared when a certain time elapsed, which was roughly 25 to 30 seconds. That meant in order to delay facing them as much as possible, I had to speed run through the whole level as quickly as I could. And this was a huge struggle as I basically had to work with a clunky control that wasn't at all made for speedrunning. On top of that, because the types of obstacles changed every time I restarted the level, it made it all the more challenging to do so. Several attempts were made and I was somewhat proficient enough to get to the first half of the level 60% of the time without getting hit. But even after spending almost 2 hours, I had yet to beat the latter half without getting hit more than 4 to 5 times, putting me in either the oranges or reds for my health. At one point, I made it to the end of the level with my health dangerously low and contemplated on whether I should just move on. But I didn't have it in me to beat the rest of the game with the amount of health I had at the time, knowing full well that there was gonna be bigger hardships waiting for me in the later stages. Anyways, the point is I was either gonna have to give up and move on with my health in the oranges or keep trying for a better health status. But after another 3 hours of trying, I was at my wit's end and decided to move on with the orange health if I got it on this attempt. However, I don't know if it was the amalgamation of the 150 plus tries that manifested into my gameplay, but a miracle happened where I managed to only get hit a single time, following it up with a magnificent display of luck, I mean skill, and was able to make it to the end while still staying in the greens for my health. After escaping the digital world, we returned to the spaceship where my female wizard friend curiously stares at the chair, wondering what kind of a brilliant evil mastermind was behind all this insanity. And from what I thought was gonna be quite obviously an alien with a big massive head, turned out to be a regular cow with an attitude. But seriously though, why a cow? Why are these guys listening to a cow? Why is the cow mashing all these buttons like it knows what it's doing? Why is there a meteor heading towards Earth? Should I be worried about that? Aside from all that, the real question was why this boss fight was so freaking easy. And here I was ready to face an adversary that matched the intensity of the previous 2 levels, only to be graced with a battle that simply involved standing in one spot while spamming my spells, using my barrier to block the attacks of the aliens and the UFOs, dodge anvils that dropped nowhere near my vicinity, and occasionally jump over a bowling ball that half the time didn't even roll in my direction. Don't know why I'm speaking like I'm disappointed when really I should just be happy about it. And the disappointment is bad because the second phase was even easier, as it was made to casually boogie away from the colored floor tiles that I probably could have done so with my big toe, which led me to actually try it out so I could further prove my point. But then came the third phase where the cow decided to stop playing around and actually started to get serious by bringing out every arsenal of weaponry it could throw at me, which invigorated my excitement for a thrilling battle. I cheesed the whole thing by staying in this one spot. And just like that, I beat the alien cow who shot its plasma cannon straight at one of the control panels, causing the whole ship to go into code red, which set the course back to planet Earth. By defeating the cow, I got another 2 achievements, then we made our way to the next world, where we crash landed in what I believe to be in the middle of the jungle. But then I saw a swarm of mosquitoes carrying syringes and a gorilla with a bazooka firing the monkey emojis, which made me rethink my deduction. I trailblazed further into the unknown territory, which had me come across a congregation of alligators that jolted up in random succession, until I stood on their heads, which then suppressed their ravenous tendencies and also made me wonder if our wizard friend here weighed more than he actually looked. Other than that, the level in itself was actually quite tame, and so long as I didn't do anything stupid, I was gonna clear this level without any issue. I got hit by an emoji monkey and my health turned yellow. Now, although this may seem like a travesty and I'd be wise to restart the level to try and regain my healthy green status, I thought it would be quite silly to do that because, let's be honest, I got hit just one time. Oh, I'm gonna regret that so much later on. So much. Anyways, after taking the emoji monkey to the face like a champ, I continued on my perilous journey and arrived at an ancient temple. As I proceeded, I noticed that the temple was chock full of booby traps that had me feeling like I was in an Indiana Jones movie, ready to narrowly escape every single one of them in style. Except I did the exact opposite and got caught by every single one of them instead. And among all of them, the worst one was by far these totems that shot a green fireball that made the whole experience that much more fun. So very, very fun. As a matter of fact, because I was having such a blast, I voluntarily decided to remain in the level for a good 2 hours, not because I was stuck. Definitely not because of that. I swear. Nope, I was definitely stuck and was just about to ready to surrender a hit or two just to get through this temple of torment. torment. But then I remembered I already did that by getting hit by that stupid monkey a while ago, so I couldn't afford to risk losing another one just because the level was too hard. Screw this, I don't care anymore, get me out of this level. Turns out I did care enough to spend another hour and have to get so good at clearing the first half of the level that I was speedrunning it now. And like all speedrunners do, they eventually get that sweet personal best at the expense of a crap ton of time. After beating the ancient temple level, I couldn't catch a single break as I got transported straight into the hands of a giant hermit crab. The fight against the goober with the pirate ship for a shell was a clusterfest full of projectiles that came from every angle imaginable. I also want to mention that there wasn't a set pattern to all the attacks that were being shot at me, so I quite literally had to get used to solely being receptive to doing my absolute best trying to dodge everything with pure skill. And boy was I doing an amazing job as I was somehow able to beat the guy on my second try, only to find out that the fight wasn't over yet and I had to turn myself into a merman to face the most fearsome creature that has ever lived in the deep blue sea. And it was none other than the legendary sea monster, the Kraken. Okay, why does it have a mustache? Aside from its not so intimidating demeanor, I quickly noticed that this fella had a lot more to offer than the initial impression I got from him, most of which was the vast number of weapons it was wielding that made me think twice about judging a book by its cover. I got my tuchus absolutely handed to me in the first few attempts as I sometimes had no idea how I was even getting damaged half the time. But by observing a bit more on what each and every one of the attacks did, I quickly found that I just had to station myself at the top left corner of the map and move back and forth to avoid majority of the attacks Mr. Mustachiopaus here threw at me. And thanks to that, the only things I had to be aware of were the corkscrew that sprung up when he stuck it in the ground, in which I just had to move forward and backward to avoid it, and this fishing rod with the spike ball that I dodged with my eyes closed to further assert my dominance. After that comes the third phase where Mr. Hermit Crabs returns as a phantom, in which he began his assault by calling upon his pufferfish friends to prickle my fishy buttock. But as you can see, they weren't a match for my buttery, smooth, evasive maneuvers. However, the whole thing went from a joke to sheer ridiculousness as the Krabby Spectre summoned a school of piranhas to rain down on me. And because these things were also color-coded, I had to sometimes accept my inescapable fate of getting hit by the man-eating fishies. But that's okay since I could just restart the level. I missed my chance to restart the level, and now I had to come to terms with the fact that I was one color shy of entering the red zone, which was only good for taking 2 or 3 hits at best. And keep in mind that I still had 3 worlds to beat with one world containing at least 3 levels each. So yeah, you could say I was royally screwed. But it's not like I could do anything about it, so I just accepted the whole predicament and moved on to the next world full of anxiety. Upon arrival, our 2 wizard friends gets teleported into a glass jar containment where they somehow had the strength to break through the thick layered glass and then proceeded to change back from their fishy state using their magical chapsticks. I began treading forward, noticing that I was in some sort of a laboratory where the person in charge of the place was working on some sick project of sorts to combine humans and frogs into frog people. Then I began encountering those very specimens armed with spears and armors and spellcasters shooting stars in my direction, which had me thinking maybe if I wished hard enough for an extra health, it granted to me. I didn't get the extra health, so I got rid of the imposter for ruining my childhood. Other than that, the level was basically a combination of the haunted hotel with the spiders and the waiters, but because these guys weren't color-coded, I had an easier time getting rid of them. As for the froggy soldiers, I just made sure to keep my distance whenever they appear so I could pick the right spell to eliminate them. Thankfully, nothing out of the ordinary occurred aside from dealing with these 2 nerds, so I was able to conquer the level on my first try. The level after that wasn't much harder because these spiky rocks fell rather quickly before I could even think to consider them a threat. Plus, these blind mole frogs were blind, so need I say more? I gotta say, if all the remaining levels were gonna be like this, I was gonna be in for a real treat. What is that? That, my friends, was a behemoth of a creature that was about to turn my easygoing stroll into a guessing game of despair. And I say guessing because for some of them, I couldn't get close enough to see what color they were in order to use the appropriate spell to kill them, which meant that I was gonna have to, as I said, guess what color they were by switching my spells around in hopes of eventually hearing this sound. Oh my gosh, finally! Now I just gotta keep going and oh, come on! It was basically when I tried to kill the unknown entity that was shooting the plasma thingies in the spaceship level. It was this guys, in case you were wondering. To make matters worse, these Goliath frogs live up to their chunky size as they had quite the health pool, so if I were to guess the wrong spell to shoot at them, I'd be standing there awkwardly for the next 20 to 30 seconds. On top of that, these magma balls rose up and down at different times, further impeding my advances, which added to the time it took to complete the level. But at the core of it, the level itself wasn't a hard one, but because I was proceeding at such a gradual pace, I sometimes fell victim to my own impatience. Which on this very attempt, I was fed up with it all, so I made the incredibly questionable decision to move on, knowing full well that my health was in the reds now. But honestly, I came to terms with it pretty fast and was ready to bear the consequences I was gonna have to face in the coming level. Little did I know, the consequences were gonna lead to a 3-hour struggle against this next boss that was gonna yet again test my patience beyond anything I've experienced so far. Much like my previous boss fight, my battle against the princess contained several ambushes coming from every direction. But in this case, it was a bunch of frogs that were ganging up on me because they were incentivized with a peck from the googly-eyed blondie. To be frank, this made me want a little kissy on the cheek as well from the princess. But I backed off at the last minute, realizing that she decided to turn into a frog herself. And as much as I would have loved a smooch, I didn't want to find out what that tongue could do, so no thank you. Aside from suppressing my intrusive thoughts, I now had to deal with even more of these harpy frogs, dropping these concoctions that I wished was a potion to top off my health. But of course that was merely wishful thinking. Not to mention this guy that tried to pull the lily pad off my feet, which I don't think it realizes that it's trying to drown a child. Morally questionable, but then again I'm trying to kill their leader, so touche. Everything was dandy up to this point, but then the real issue came to my attention during the third phase, in which the frog princess must have thought I really wanted that kiss, so she decided to use her seductive techniques by plopping her head out to throw them kisses at me. And the problem with this was that 1, I made it clear I didn't want them, and 2, I could only deal damage to the princess when she came out of the waters, and majority of the time she plopped outside my spell's range. That with this fairy frog sprinkling them flowers as it gets catapulted limited my ability to freely move around. The only way I was gonna get out of this conundrum was to come up with the most brilliant plan I could ever think of. A plan so superb that without it I could never beat this boss. And that was to pick one spot to stay stationary, then keep using my barrier to block the flowers and wait until the frog princess came to me instead. Basically play like a wuss. Regardless of my methods, I did my best against the croaker, and after 2 or so more hours of marvelous wussy gameplay, I bested the female Kermit and headed towards the next world. And just as I entered the portal, I ended up in the Wild West, encountering a bunch of chicken cowboys riding an angry buffalo. Until now, every world was followed up by a couple of run and gun stages before facing up against the boss. But this time it was a back-to-back boss battle. And boy was I not able to catch a break on this one as well, as I had a rogue chicken shooting a bullet at me vertically that then dropped after a few seconds, an eagle that tried to ram its beak against my behind, and a flock of these other cock-a-doodle-doos firing their revolvers at me. It was basically similar to that of my fight against the hermit crab, but the battle was now in the air. And I can't stress how hard it was to get through this first phase, as I was encountering 2 major issues. The first one was that maneuvering around on this fake Nimbus 3000 was actually incredibly slow, where trying to outrun a bullet was basically futile if you were in its path of trajectory. I just didn't mention it in my fight against the cow, cause that one was an absolute cheese fest. Second one was that I couldn't find a single spot to cheese this dang fight. Like there wasn't a single spot that I wasn't in range of the flightless gunners and the gunless kamikaze eagle. And so I began to come up with a plan by using my 200 plus IQ intelligence to solve this inconceivably harrowing situation. Except I didn't have that high on IQ, so I just did it the old-fashioned way of flying back and forth and praying I don't get hit. Spoilers, it didn't work. Until I realized I haven't been using my invincible dodging ability, which by doing so finally got me through it. Only to find myself in the pickle yet again, where the buffalo comes back with a minigun shooting out a pair of cactus that had needles spreading in both ways, which ended up being another sickening process of trial and error where I tried many things to beat the bison Rambo. But thankfully, unlike the last phase, this one actually had a cheesy way to win, which was to cozy up in this area right here, occasionally slide away from the vertical bullet attacks, and use my invincible loop-de-doo mechanics to evade the aviator nerd. Now, I know I said that this was a cheesy strat, but with all things considered, I made multiple mistakes all because of the pressure of going through the grueling time to get back to this point if I got hit, and I let it get to me so many times. But after tightening up a bit, I did manage to become victorious, and on to the next level I went, where I had stumbled upon the slums of the city life full of tall skyscrapers in the middle of the night. The initial 5 or so seconds were actually quite peaceful, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But the tranquil nature of the level quickly turned into a crossfire of eggs being shot out by a bunch of chicken mafias. There were certain moments throughout the level where I was caught off guard by the timing of when the vehicles drove by, as I tried to deal with other variables like this weirdo who came out of the sewers to throw a perfectly good pepperoni pizza slice. And because I hated the fact that the bugger was throwing away the salami top crusty bread of goodness so casually, I made sure he never saw the light of day ever again. Other than that, the whole level was basically a repeat of dealing with his 3 bozos until reaching the end, so yeah, not much to talk about this one. But boy do I have much to say about the next level, which was a boss battle against this chicken that had an ego bigger than its luscious pomade, using the very mirror to emit whatever these were. There was also Mr. Tumnus from Narnia and Prisita Cupid over here joining the chicken Bravo and his groovy onslaught. Funny enough though, it didn't take long before the game decided to break and the 2 lackeys glitched their way to seizing their attacks against me when I stationed myself on the far left of the map, requiring me to just be wary of these things, and I still don't know what they are. Nevertheless, I got the first phase done and over with fairly quickly. And then came the next one, which turned out to be a bit of a challenge, as I now had to look out for this overprotective spearman, or woman, but honestly I have no way of knowing, who wobbled its way across the map and a bunch of spears sticking out of the ground. Oh, and this guy decided to function again, so that was fun. Until I found a way to completely skip the second phase. And to do it, I had to activate my special move to empower my spells. Then I made sure to hit all my shots throughout the transitioning of the phases, and voila, second phase never happened. The last phase was a prehistoric themed battle where the chicken turned into an Ooga Booga caveman with a bunch of dinosaurs appearing from both ends of the screen. At first I went with my gut feeling, where my fight or flight response immediately gravitated towards fleeing the giant old reptiles, but moments after that I discovered they were killable, so I instilled the fear of extinction back in their very souls, along with the Ooga Booga chicken of course, which eventually led to its defeat, where it fell in the fountain of youth and reverted back into a tiny beta hatchling. And with that, I've finally made it to the very last world, with countless sacrifices and difficult decisions that had to be made to get to this point, leaving leaving me vulnerable to losing my entire progress if I didn't tread carefully in the final 3 levels. Just as I entered the final portal, I was immediately brought in the presence of Beethoven, who tried to crush me with the chord-striking hammers of the grand piano he played. As I finessed my way out of them, several notes began gradually falling from above, and a couple that marched across from one end of the screen to the other. Despite being dumped with so many things at one time, I learned that I could get rid of the notes that fell while dealing damage to the deaf musician as well, which by doing so had me beat him on my second try. The next level was against another boss, but this time it was a cute little chihuahua that tried its best to justify this beware of the dog sign, but ended up becoming a laughingstock by our 2 wizard friends, which made me feel bad for the little guy. Until the little guy wasn't so little anymore and ended up being a hybrid doggo sent from the underworld that breathed fire, created a gust of wind, discharged a snot bubble that when popped struck lightning, and these 2 fellas were able to detach themselves to run at me. But despite the entire place turning into a post-apocalyptic environment for dramatic effects and I was battling against one of the fiercest creatures known to Greek mythology, the only thing I considered a threat was this pug with the power to summon Zeus's lightning bolt. As for the rest, it was just for show, as the chihuahua couldn't breathe its flames farther than you could probably see with those derpy eyes. The little tornado would just swish up to grace my face with a bit of a breeze, and the 2 pups running at me was easily avoidable with a well-timed jump, thus leading to a seamless victory against the not-so-intimidating hellhound, and off I went to face the final boss of the game, which was the magical sentient book itself. And from what I had hoped to be an easy win just like the previous 2 bosses, this one was nothing like them, as the magic book was able to call upon many of the signature attacks from the bosses I had already trampled. Not just that, but the book itself changed colors, which meant that I had to switch around my spells in the midst of all the mayhem. But because doing so caused me to pause for a moment, I became susceptible to all the attacks that surrounded me. It felt almost impossible to get past this first phase, which made me think about the choices I had made before getting to this point. Choices that if I had maybe been a bit more wise in making them, I wouldn't be in this dire quandary. Oh look, I can cheese it. Wow, I really overthunk this one now, didn't I? But I wasn't in the clear just yet, as the next phase was going to blow my mind. I can't believe this is the final boss. What a joke. Or so I thought, but then came the final phase of the battle that truly brought fear in every fiber of my being, where the book had taken up a human form to become a powerful wizard. He began waving his wand to summon various different cherubs to use their respective elemental attacks that made me evade for my dear life. But the most problematic part of this phase was when the sled with the icy reindeer kept running at me without a set pattern or timing, which led me to take a hit on the 3rd cycle. And this made me panic a little, as I was either 1 or 2 hits away from dying. But before I could make up my mind to restart the fight, it was too late. I restarted the level in hopes of maybe making the game glitch me back into the final boss again. But the reality was, I had lost all my progress. I was distraught, devastated. But most of all, I was mad at myself for not making the appropriate choices during the times that mattered most, brushing off key moments as insignificant because I was too lazy or I didn't feel like redoing the level again, when I could have easily prevented this from happening if I had exercised a little more patience. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm giving up. Or am I? As demoralized as I was, what truly mattered at the time was whether I was gonna wallow in my sorrows or give myself a good slap on the back and finish what I had started. And although it may take another 15 plus hours to get back to the end, the very fact that I had the choice to do so was enough of a reason for me. And so with a heart of steel, I speedran through all the levels again, but this time with a better understanding on how much health I can afford to lose for each world. And what a sight it was to behold, as I was able to get through the whole thing in less than half the time it took prior, allowing me to face up against the magical book again to finally put an end to this frivolous challenge. I easily got through the first 2 phases just like before, but the fact of the matter was that the 3rd phase with the elemental attacks was still something I struggled to overcome. And to prevent what had happened last time from occurring again, I had to beat the boss without taking a single hit, lest I wanted to risk going through the entire game again a 3rd time. But despite my efforts, I accidentally landed on one of the green cherub's wind attacks. And you would think that I would learn from my past mistakes by immediately restarting the fight, right? But what can I say, old habits die hard. And like the absolute maniac of a gamer I was, instead of restarting the level, I nonchalantly proceeded with the combat confidence that I was gonna be able to dodge everything for the rest of the fight, which ended up being the right decision this time, as moments after doing so, I defeated the mischievous book wizard to obtain the final 2 achievements to 100% this game. Hope you guys enjoy watching, and if you want to see more content like this, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. As for me, I'm gonna play this game a third time just for the heck of it, and I will see you all in the next one.